time and the static block. Most of us see time as something that flows. Physics says it probably doesn't. The past, present, and the future alike are equally real, fixed, static points within a static four-dimensional structure. The late Einstein in particular expressed this personally, referring to time as a stubbornly persistent illusion. So an obvious puzzle follows: if nothing is moving, how do we perceive time and change it all? That's what this video is here for. Listing models and why they fall short. The standard models are the moving spotlight models, suggesting a kind of present moment light moving across the block. B theory, which says the block is static and flows an illusion. And C theory, where events are ordered but have no inherent backward or forward flow. The moving spotlight runs into a well-known problem: hypertime. If it moves, that movement needs a speed, and speed needs a further dimension of time to measure it in, a regress that never resolves. The most developed B-theory models try to explain the directionality of time through entropy, which is a better attempt and deserves credit, but it borrows separate principles that in hindsight might not be necessary. Type C is reliant on purely continuous processing, which from a thermodynamic and evolutionary perspective, continuous processing is a nightmare logistically. There is also a complete void in the engineering world in replicating a continuous mechanism like this, despite our current level of tech and the amount of energy and cooling and space tech has in comparison to our 20-watt brain forced to fit in a skull that is highly prone to overheating. The mere premise. I would like to cover this early on, as I think it's an important piece that can make this significantly less complicated than it needs to be. The 4D block is a perfect mirror of the 3D world. In the three-dimensional world, you can't see the future, just like you can't see the room across town. Nobody finds that mysterious. You are a localized conscious being, not a God's eye view of everything. The same applies on the block. An observer is a localized being occupying one region of it. That's why experience doesn't present the whole block at once. For the same simple reason, an observer in the 3D world doesn't perceive their entire life at once. If the block perfectly mirrors the 3D world, the asymmetry still applies without requiring any additional mechanisms. The mechanism. Before we get into it, I want to explain the tools so you can get a better understanding. Consciousness, regardless of its characteristics, is still just consciousness. The same way that a letter is still a letter, even if it's a different font. Also very important, addressing why am I me. As humans, we feel special, like we were selected from some cosmic waiting room. So we come up with these questions like, why am I me? Which feel complex from the inside, but in reality, it's no different than asking, why is this rock, that specific rock? There was no prior pool you were selected from before birth, you just are. In case of discrete processing, it would act as like conscious snapshots. Each of these snapshots is completely convinced of its own continuity, as it's an exact copy of the neurological state of the observers in the 3D world. How these separate frames produce this continuous experience is because, as we discussed, consciousness, regardless of the font, is just consciousness. Every conscious organism is completely convinced it's special, itself is a solid thing, when in reality we are all the same phenomenon through different lenses. If it helps, you can also picture it as a light. So instead of thinking of separate frames, think of the same phenomenon that results in this experience, because all these conscious snapshots only contain the contents of your world line as they are you. Cross-species analysis. The model predicts that the processing rate and the biological ceiling should be measurable, and that it should vary across species in a way that track back to their survival demands. The clearest metric is critical flicker fusion frequency, the rate at which a flickering light stops appearing as discrete flashes and becomes a continuous glow. Humans average around 60 Hz. The common housefly is around 250, about 4 times higher. That's the documented reason our flies are so hard to swat. Your hand moving at an ordinary human speed represents a comparatively sparse, slow-moving event relative to the fly's much higher processing rate. The same event, the same hand, different ceiling, perceived completely differently. Swordfish makes this even clearer. They hunt in water as cold as 3 degrees Celsius, where their cold-blooded prey's visual systems are slowed. Swordfish counter this with a biological heating organ, actively warming their eyes and brains up to 15 degrees above the surrounding water. Experimentally, eyes warmed this way register flickers more than 10 times faster than the same tissue cooled to ambient temperatures, a measurable tenfold increase in processing rate, paying for in real metabolic cost for the specific purpose of perceiving freight that would otherwise be perceptually invisible in time. That's not a correlation, it's a direct documented trade-off between metabolic investment and temporal resolution. Dopamine and ADHD. Within a single species, the same logic still applies. The perceptual ceiling is set by biology, but there are many different variables regarding how information is processed and how that perceptual ceiling is filled moment to moment. Not necessarily how much is perceived in absolute terms, but how your brain allocates its capacity and how effectively what's perceived is integrated as a usable signal. ADHD offers a useful test case here, though what follows is my interpretive extension of existing data, not a settled fact. Dopaminergic dysfunction is a commonly recognized feature in ADHD. Under this model, dopamine dysregulation does not necessarily mean less sensory input. It means that the input functions effectively closer as noise than a usable signal, which is consistent with the symptoms of ADHD: forgetfulness, disorganization, difficulty in low stimulation settings. The ordinary experience. For an example anyone can relate to, the slow workday. A slow workday drags because a low stimulation environment occupies little of that perceptual ceiling. Minimal contrast to register. Absorbing task fills it, and hours compress, just like a kid reaching for some silly game on his Chromebook in a slow, boring class, or reaching for your phone while waiting in line. Allocating focus onto something stimulating fills more of that ceiling, in turn making it feel as though time is moving faster. There is a paradox here, though. In retrospect, a low stimulation environment may feel like it flew by, or vice versa, because retrospective duration is dependent on how much perceived change your brain has to draw from in hindsight. Closing, this is a working draft, and I'm open to any genuine critiques. The neurochemistry in particular should be seen as my own interpretive extension on current data. I would also like to say, because I know the kind of reaction this can cause, that knowing the ingredients makes the dish no lesser. Your life, in this case, being the dish. Knowing the mechanics makes your life no less real or meaningful, as meaning comes from within the experience.